Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarlane, and this one is episode 140. And the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/140. And welcoming back to the show after quite some time is Kyle Anzalone. Kyle, how are you doing, man?
Doing well. Happy to be back on the show. It's been far too long.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I was so glad we could throw this together. But your titles have kind of changed a little bit since we last spoke. Do you want to introduce yourself? You have a new show. What's going on?
Yeah, no, everything's new. I turned my old show, Foreign Policy Focus, into more of a YouTube show. We still put it out as a podcast. It's all like, if you listen as a podcast, you don't miss it, but you get a little bit more like maps and articles and video when you go to the YouTube page for Conflicts of Interest. That's the name of the show. It expanded. So on most of the episodes, my co-host is Will Porter. We've written a bunch of articles together, and everybody likes it when we work together. So we just decided to finally throw it down and put a new show together. With changing the show from Foreign Policy Focus to Conflicts of Interest, it's allowed me and Will to like explore a little bit more outside of foreign policy topics all the time too, which it has been fun. I think for a libertarian show other than the Scott Horton show, we probably talked the on the last show, I really wanted to talk about the puppy side thing and stuff like that. So I at antiwar.com, mostly helping out with the viewpoints on the page there. And then I'm the news editor of the Libertarian Institute.
Awesome. Yeah, and I thought it was great after you had Will on the show so many times just to make him the co-host officially. That was
Yeah, it needed to happen, and I needed to rename the show, so do it all at once, man.
Yeah, well, that's great, man. And I'm sure that a lot of people on this show have, listened to either Foreign Policy Focus or now Conflicts of Interest. But we were also, part of the Libertarian Union together, I guess, back when that was still a thing. I don't know if it is now or what, but
Yeah, I don't know what's like going on with the pages or anything, but we've certainly like I just did the Actual Anarchy podcast for the second time. So I know Daniel's a part of that, and that's a great show. Man, that was one of my favorite interviews I've ever like. Two of my favorite interviews that I've done are for War Machine and now The Beast on Actual Anarchy. I don't even like movies, but I don't know, get going there and talk war and stuff like that has been a good time. And so, and then I know Nick is still doing his thing, his like Music Liberty show, which has been great. And you got shook off the dust of Liberty Weekly and are putting out some more episodes.
yeah, I did. Yeah, it started becoming fun again. So it's like, well, if you're not having fun, like, what are you doing? But I had a kid and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been great to be back and to reconnect with you guys and to have you guys back on my show again. And so you did War Machine, and I'll link to your appearances in the show notes page. But you did War Machine and Beast, the Beast.
The Beast or the Beast of War. I had never heard of it, and somebody had emailed Dan and kind of recommended it and said, "Hey, it was a great anti-war movie," and it really gets into like why war, especially counterinsurgency, and it just shows that it's awful without ever like actually saying it. You know what I mean? Which is the great part about the movie. It's kind of platoonish, and actually, now that I say that, I wonder because I think no, it probably came out after Platoon because Platoon came out in like '86, right? I think this came out in '90. Okay, never mind. So it might be the opposite way around that they ripped off Oliver Stone, not the other way around. But yeah, there's like an end scene that's kind of similar to that. But yeah, no, it's a really good movie.
And someone I've been getting in this thing where I like to watch a lot of interviews with vets on YouTube. And for some
Mhm.
reason, like I like to watch documentaries and stuff too. But there were some vets saying that Platoon was the most realistic Vietnam movie, like some Vietnam vets. Just an interesting aside.
Yeah, did they give any other like were there any other movies that were mentioned? I'm just curious as to like what would be the competition for Platoon.
Yeah, I don't know because the video I was watching was of like this, I don't know, 60-year-old Vietnam vet shot an M60 machine gun for the first time since Nam, and he just offhanded said like Platoon was it. But
Oh, okay.
I don't know, like have you seen We Were Soldiers?
Yeah, yeah, that movie came out when I was a kid, and I mean, like in fairness, when I watched that movie, like I was a little bit confused because like I was young enough to just like be all propagandized. You know what I mean? Like we're the good guys, we win the wars, and I mean, like clearly, like the unnamed like crazy people popping out of the ground that are kind of like savages aren't given a fair portrayal in the movie or anything like that. But at the same time, like it doesn't feel like that Mel Gibson's like maybe he's like the hero of the movie, but it's still not like a good feeling that you get about America at the end of that movie. Like it still feels like kind of bad for whatever reason. And so and then they did the whole scene, like the storyline with the women back home at the military base and like waiting for the knock on their door and everything. Like like you really had to question, wonder, especially like when then like after the movie I asked my dad about it in Vietnam and everything, and you kind of figure out like it wasn't like as critical as they thought it was. And so that young soldier that died that just had the little baby and wife and stuff like that, like it does leave you wondering like if knowing what you know then about Vietnam when it came out, if his sacrifice was worth it. But I'm my guess is that the movie like probably isn't super accurate like as far as like a representation of what was going on in Vietnam.
Yeah, and I thought it was I always love Mel Gibson in a movie. Well, especially war movies. I mean, he's had four or five really good ones. Um, but in watching it, I don't know, like that Ken Burns documentary. Did you see that one, the one about Vietnam?
I didn't actually watch the whole thing. I watched. I read. Well, I read like quite a few articles on it, but a lot of the articles had like links to different parts of it, and so I watched sections of it. I figured it was too long to spend the whole time watching, but people had cut the important parts, and that's what I did.
Yeah. Like I don't know. I just ever since I did that one documentary about killing, I think it was called Blood Makes the Green Grass Grow. I'll link
Hmm.
to the show notes page, but I've been obsessed with like the psychology of killing in combat. Um maybe who knows, maybe I even got you to talk about that last time we did an interview. Because I remember the last time we were talking, because you got me really into foreign policy.
Yeah.
At that time, I was just diving into it, but I haven't kept up as much. Um, but I always I brought you on at one point to kind of think out loud with you about how to think about vets, and
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know if you recall that.
Yeah. No, and it's a little bit of a conversation that we had on the interview about the Beast 2 on Natural Anarchy. Um, kind of about the soldiers that were waging the occupation. In that case, they were Soviets, but like at the same time, like whenever you like sit there and you actually like look at who these people are, in 2012, one of the people was now a contributing editor to antiwar.com, Danny Sherjan. He was a major in the army. He's now retired and out. He taught at West Point, and he writes great anti-war articles now. But at the time, he was one of the guys that was like fighting this and insurgency, and so like you're waging violence on the Afghan people. Like that's what the U.S. is doing there, and I've talked to Danny. Like I know that like he's not a bad guy, and like I don't think I would ever worry about him actually killing anybody here in the U.S. But like I don't know what all the positions he was put in Afghanistan, and I'm sure that goes for a lot of vets where like You know, you wouldn't worry about them necessarily, like probably almost all of them being violent people now. You know, there's probably a disproportionate number with PTSD and being trained to kill and then having to kill, or, you know, getting to kill, depending on choosing however it all went down. Probably like changes the brain and makes those people a little bit like, just on the statistical margins, maybe more likely to be violent than the average dude or whatever. But you know, most of these guys, there's no reason to think that they would ever harm anybody here in the U.S. And yet, like, you know, a trained killer is a trained killer, right? Like that's like part of what you become as a soldier.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I've been trying to watch a lot of documentaries or interviews with vets to kind of understand, because you can't understand it because you've never been in that position. And in a way, that doesn't mean you can't comment on it or have opinions about it, but um in a lot of ways it's like virgins talking about sex. You know, you talk all around it, and that's kind of what, in that book on killing, Dave Grossman, that book that I reviewed, that's what he talks about, you know.
Yeah.
uh, but
Well,
it's
and then I guess the other interesting point is that like you're told like pretty much from the time you're born. I mean, I grew up in Missouri, so maybe this is a little bit different, like in some liberal cities or something like that. But like the U.S. military isn't wrong, and you know, being a soldier is a good thing. And if somebody tells you to go fight, you're doing it for your friends, your family, your country, your city, your county, like it's all for peace and goodness and everything like that. And it's because we have to. And so, I mean, that's the mindset of people when they, you know, join the army. And, you know, I'm a freak for believing that's not the case, right? Like, I'm like the very outcast of society that believes that, like, no, we shouldn't be glorifying soldiers like this. Like, there may have been times in history where people have had to use violence to like fight for their freedom and stuff like that. Like, I don't deny, but that's not what's going on in the 21st century. Not even close, right? Like, we're occupying Afghanistan for what reason? But yeah. So, like, how can you fault people for believing what everybody has told them to believe in, what everybody around them believes, what everybody they love believes in? You know, once you then like become a soldier, it like adds to it, because then like, you know, everybody around you like reinforces it. And you know, not only is it, you know, you get the like kind of the passive propaganda movies and everything like that, but people are, you know, thank you for your service, you're making us free. I mean, I remember after 9/11, like a soldier walked into the you know, in fatigues in the baseball game, the entire like, you know, section who sees them would stand up and clap. Or you know, one of them gets on or off a plane and everybody has to stand and clap. And like, how can you think you're the bad guy if that's how people are, you know, reacting to you, and what you're doing is wrong and everything like that?
social pressure is a weird thing. It really, I'm working on this project right now where I'm trying to compare World War I propaganda and World War I British, especially hatred for conscientious objectors. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to compare that to people who doubt the COVID-19 narrative. And I got some clips of people during World War I. Of course, they were interviewed decades later, but they're saying things that you could cut it and you could paste it to our exact situation about, you know, all this war propaganda and about trying to convince young men to go and fight. And if you thought that was wrong, you know, just the whole regime and everything, all the social pressure, and all those feelings, it is so eerily similar. Like, history repeats itself. And I got like tingles and chills when I was working on it. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I guess, in a lot of ways, you know, COVID, I think people compared it to 9/11, and in a lot of ways that does make sense. It's not like you know, you could actually be at war with the virus, but hell, they're gonna have the military distribute the vaccine. So, you know, that's really the way they're looking at it. Like, this is the kind of, it's the same kind of government response as waging a war. And you know, it's, I identified the same problem that I, you know, was too young to do after 9/11, but the libertarians identified after 9/11, which was, once, you know, we decide that we're going to fight terrorism, once we decide we're going to fight COVID, the government's never going to be able to stop. There's always going to be COVID somewhere, and it is going to be perpetual.
Yeah. And it was as early as the exact point when when they announced that they had named COVID-19 in that press conference, he gets on this director, and I have this footage, and he says, he frames everything in militaristic terms. This is public enemy number one. COVID-19 is more dangerous than terrorism. So it's like every crisis and every invisible imaginary enemy that comes up is worse than the last one. It's just nuts.
Well, I mean, I'm guessing that a lot of it has to be similar because you're asking people to make sacrifices that don't necessarily make sense, and so you have to claim it's for the greater good. Right. And so, like, I think during World War II, one of the big sacrifices Americans had to make, not only because of the Great Depression, but because we were sending more meat to Europe and stuff like that, was to further cut back on meat intake and everything. And, buying war bonds and stuff like that. I think it's in one of Tom Woods' book. It could be Bob Murphy's. I think it's one of the politically incorrect guides. They talk about how like they would go beat up people who refused to buy war bonds during World War II and stuff like that. And so, I mean, it is kind of like, what's wrong with you? Why won't you make this sacrifice for the greater good? And so it gets weird when like ever you're now talking about like you have to like give up for society, and it is a very similar feeling with COVID and war.
The biggest parallel that I found was that one of the people who was there alive during World War I was interviewed and said that what the regime would do is that they would frame everything in terms of the threat of death. Is that if you didn't go fight and sacrifice, the country was going to die, or we will kill you if you don't also. And once you got in the army, if you didn't go over the top or refused to go over the top, everything was framed in desertion and executions, but also back on the home front too. And it's that threat of death that we see all the time with COVID. Like, if you go outside without a mask, you don't care about grandma. If you don't think we should lock down, you want to kill everyone, kind of thing.
Yeah. No, and it's it's not to say that like nobody's died of COVID. Like, I'm sure people have died of COVID, and but when you look at the actual numbers and everything like that, it doesn't seem to be. It's not the plague or something where everybody who gets it is 1 in 10 who get it is gonna die. It's nowhere near that. 99.9% or something like that. And yeah, whenever you are talking about grandma, like, older people are at higher risk for respiratory illness. That's part of life, and it's tough. But whenever you've like now changed and set the narrative that anybody who goes to see an elderly family member who they absolutely love and want to spend time with, and like, there are numbers of studies, like numerous studies on like human beings and like how important not only like being able to socialize is, but like physical contact and stuff like that. Being able to give grandma a hug is like important for like you and grandma. Like, it's seriously important to like well-being, not just in it makes you happy for a couple minutes sense, but what humans need to survive and thrive. Like that's all a part of it. And telling people that that's dangerous and that's going to kill somebody, like, especially when like you're being overblown about it. If somebody's like hacking and coughing and like probably is sick, like if I had a grandfather in a nursing home and I used to go visit him fairly frequently. I had pneumonia and like I was sick at home that week. I didn't go visit, like drag myself to the nursing, you know what I mean? And so like, yeah, it's probably a good thing that people are aware that like not to go see, an older family member if you're sick. But I feel like that's something that a lot of people like already did a little bit. And if you got to do a little bit more, that's fine. But yeah, to make it that you're killing everybody because you want to like go see family members and like be with the people you love and stuff. It gets to be too much. And like, it's, I think really damaging to people. I was just reading, this was in the Hill. They said that from March to October, or through September of this year, child hospitalizations for mental health reasons were up 31% for children from 12 to 17, and then the age group below that was up 24%. I mean, for kids, like the mental health hospitalizations, it's a rough time. First of all, most of the time the cops end up showing up too, and so it doesn't feel just like, oh, you're going to the hospital because like you have a health thing. The cops are also there, and so that's like, what's going on with this kid. And then, or even if the parents just bring them in, it's a very unpleasant time. They may give you heavy, sedated meds. If you end up getting checked in inpatient somewhere, like you're probably going to be exposed, especially if you're like, just a kid that's struggling. This is like a one-off thing, to kids that are far more have serious mental illnesses than you. And it could be a pretty traumatizing experience. I worked with kids who had some mental health issues, and like this is, some of them would get hospitalized sometimes, and like nobody ever liked that. It's a terrible experience. And so the fact that you're increasing that by 31, 24%, like that's also got to be something that has to be talked about.
For sure. And I have a friend whose family member was actually had a mental breakdown, an emotional breakdown, and was committed for a little bit. And then they're following up in like a mental health, a group program. I think it's outpatient, but there is a waiting list to get on this. The demand is so high for this outpatient group therapy, and there are so many people in there who are there because of COVID, explicitly, or things, that have their lives were already stressful and anxious and anxiety provoking and depressed enough, and then you layer all this on top. It's just too much.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, so like think about it. Like it's not really surprising that people need group therapy. If you like, a lot of guys, like, once a week they get together with their boys at the bar, right? You get around, and my boss sucks about this was rough this week, this went well for me this week, my wife did this, everybody laughs. And like it seems like trivial and just like a fun thing, but it's actually like therapeutic and something that people need. And so if you deprive people of that for an extended period of time, and it's not even like you just shut down the bars, right? And like people like had to find other places. You shut down everything. You shut down the churches. And so it was, the people like who get together for like brunch after they go to Sunday morning mass and stuff like that, and get to chat and stuff, like all that is, really important to people, and you take that away. And so now they need these group therapy programs and stuff, when really all you have to do is like open bars and churches and wherever else, people need to go to congregate, to talk, and, just deal and joke about life. Like things suck a lot of times, especially when you're locked in your house all day.
Yeah. So you have always been, because we're in a group chat together and we've talked, we've all, in the Libertarian Union, we've all known each other for a couple of years now. And I'm always kind of the conspiracy theorist reactionary type, but you're always the level-headed, like educated one. What do you think is the end game here? Like, what do you reasonably see happening in the next couple of years?
Specifically with COVID?
With COVID, and then, with the future of the country, I guess it's a real big question. Kind of
So I guess I will say I didn't think the lockdowns would last over a month. I had a recent episode of my show I did with Pete Quinones. People loved it. I really recommend checking out that interview. I'll send you the link so you put in the show notes page. Yeah. But I told Pete, I was like, man, I thought because it started in winter, and I thought as soon as it hit spring at the very latest, people would be like generally done with the lockdowns. Maybe they would still wear masks when they went inside places. Like you pop one on when you go to the grocery store. But even that I thought would be like just older people worried about getting sick, or I got a friend who takes care of her grandma. Like she does the grocery shopping. She goes and sees grandma and spends that important like quality time with her, right? Like, maybe that person should wear a mask. I'm not, a virologist or anything, but it seems to me that like if you're in that position, you want to wear a mask, that's fine. Whatever, maybe you should do that, right? But I didn't think that we would be, in November and everybody would be like, it's required to wear a mask if you walk in a store. I don't see anybody without a mask on in a store here. Now, whenever I'm around my apartment complex and just, walking my dog or whatever, people rarely are now wearing a mask outside, I've noticed. And most of the time, like, when I first got my dog in April, like people would like cross the street while you're walking down the sidewalk or whatever. And I don't see a lot of that. So, I feel like in some sense, like people must be a little bit less worried about it, just like as far as like the precautions are taken. Although then I went hiking last weekend, and people hiking alone were wearing a mask. That was surprising to me. Yeah.
Well, people around here, some people will wear their mask in their car alone when they're driving alone.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, people don't wear masks outside, really. When you go in, I try not to wear a mask when I can get away with it. We kind of talked about, I mentioned on the other show, the Papa John's incident.
Yeah, I listened to you and Keith talk about that.
Yeah, not my most shining moment. However, I stand by the sentiment, but it could have been handled a bit better. But I still will. I'll go into places and I'll be the only one not wearing a mask, and I put onus on them if you're going to enforce. The thing that bothers me, and I'm kind of repeating myself, but the thing that bothers me is when these store workers enforce it because it's the law, or they will fall back on that. Like, if you're gonna use the Nuremberg defense, I won't put up with that. But if you tell me like, hey, man, like my boss says I need to go around, this is the store policy, but essentially these private businesses are being sock puppets for the state.
Well, my sense is that like people are probably given a script. Like their boss probably tells them like, if somebody's not wearing a mask, this is what you say. And if they say I'm gonna put a mask on, you say good. And if they say no, I'm not, you tell them to leave. Like, my guess is that most of these like places, the people don't really have like a whole lot of floods. Now, like, I guess maybe if I were in that position and I saw another young guy, I would like approach it like more like, hey man, can you like put a mask on or wait outside? I'm really sorry about it. But at the same time, like, I don't know, like the only people that I really feel bad for are the like actual essential workers who have to actually go to work every day and put up with all this, and like, if COVID is a threat, are the ones that are most exposed to it. And then, everybody else gets to sit at home and either, not have to commute to work, you get to do your morning meeting in your PJs. And then, other people are fortunate enough to, I mean, there's a pretty good, I'm not saying that it's easy to be out of work or that you should be happy to be out of work, but there are people that are making $11 an hour at Taco Bell, and there were other people getting $600 a week unemployment.
Right.
And so like I feel a little bit worse for the person at Taco Bell. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
And so like I do like grocery store plays, like if they're like doing the math stuff, that's one thing. But man, if like some random lady walked up to me like walking on the trail and was like, it's the law, I would have kept going, man.
Yeah. It all depends on, the situation and everything like that. I mean, so I'm a bit more surprised that there isn't more, like, we're not Marxists, of course, but I'm surprised there isn't more class conflict, because some of the gross injustice and why I guess it really bothers me when neoliberals or even progressive people are trying to push this lockdown mask agenda so hard, is because, I mean, of course you're going to push it. You get to sit at home working from home. You're not someone, how come essential workers don't get to stay and work from home, or people who do manual labor? That's such a classist thing,
Right. Or why don't they get an extra $600 a week too, or something? Like, you
Right.
know what I mean? And I'm like you said, I'm not a Marxist. I'm not like, for helicopter money or anything like that. But hell, I mean, the Pentagon got money that they were supposed to use to like make masks and stuff with, and they end up just bailing out weapons makers. Like, $1 billion goes a long way when it's just going to regular families. You know what I mean? It doesn't make that many missiles. It makes a couple F-35s, but a fraction of $1 billion, a very small fraction of $1 billion makes a world of difference for millions of American families. And so not saying we should just helicopter money to everybody, but if we're printing up billions and trillions of dollars, there's weapons makers, or then there's people. So,
well, I don't know if it was Bob Murphy, like at the beginning of this COVID-19 lockdown, he was saying there is.
Yeah, I think on the Scott Horton show, not
it?
necessarily making an argument for UBI, but saying that like in the eminent domain sense, I hope I said that right now. I sound like an idiot. If the government is, essentially taking away your property, your work, your labor, then they should have to reimburse you somehow. In the same way that if they decide to build a highway through your property, they should pay you for that property if they're going to take it anyways. Not that they should take it, not that they should keep people from working. It's one of those really complicated things because once you give a UBI, I don't think it's going away. Same thing with student loans. I think once you stop student loan payments, are you going to restart them? Are all these college kids going to start repaying loans? There is no way. I think there's under a 10% chance that people make more than a couple months of student loan. Maybe there's like a little lag where like you're supposed to pay for a couple months, but Biden signed some executive order that says you don't really have to, and then they'll just take care of it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And my interest has been frozen, and I haven't made payments. Partly it's because, well, if they just forgive it, I'm not going to get that money back. And I don't think it's fair because there's the whole argument, what about prudent people who saved and worked their butts off to pay their loans back? It's not fair to them. Well, I mean, there's all the arguments against it. That's just one emotional.
Or all the young people that didn't go to college and have been busting their ass. They're the essential employees. It's the mechanics and the carpenters and stuff. All the kids that have been going to school or trade school for that and didn't take on student loan debt or already have it paid off, right? The very little that they had from going to trade school. Now you're going to take their tax money and give it to people that rather than busting their ass that whole time, like
for 5 years.
Right. Like, look, if you could work in a garage for 4 years or go to college for 4 years, there are very few people who are going to work harder at college than in the garage. There may be a couple people really bust their ass in college and, work 2 jobs and do everything else. But like the vast majority of people are, getting up at like 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. or 2 p.m. or whatever and partying and stuff like that a lot more than anybody else would.
And I think there is the argument about if you're going to force people to stay home and not work, paying them. I think it's a fair argument. I really do, even though it's not what we would like, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like we're past anywhere you would be with libertarian. You know what I mean? It's like it's like people who like try to like, make the border a litmus test for libertarians. It's like, look, people, like the it's a very complicated thing that's going on. Yeah, somebody comes into the US, there's welfare and all that, and they get the right to vote, and there's a lot of reasons, people can make. And then there's other, open borders reasons, including the freedom of association on the open border side too. Like, if you're somebody who, marries a Mexican woman, right? And then she can't come to this country because of our immigration laws. Like, that's just as much freedom of association as the people who don't want Mexicans to come into our country. And so, the libertarian communism doesn't have the answer to borders, and it doesn't have the answer to what to do when the government closes down a huge portion of the economy.
Yeah, it's tough, and I think of course, we know what the solution would be in our ideological, like our idealistic world, but when it comes to bold reality, it makes things a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I mean that's why you can't like apply every situation strictly in like a libertarian. Like I'll even see like sometimes on one of these groups. Sorry, my dog's trying to get my attention. I'll sometimes see people in like groups who are like trying to like I saw some guy say like, well, I can't be a firefighter because firefighters get paid by the state or something like that. And it's like, man, if you want to like if that's your thing, like be a firefighter. Like it's not that like it has to be state, but it's
Yeah,
be a firefighter.
right. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, you, in a way, you're making your life a lot more miserable. And I think I mean, if you're not a net taxpayer, right? That's the term. If you're not a net taxpayer, I don't think that would even make a problem. If on net you take more money from the system than you give in, because I guess you've been paying taxes your whole life, you will pay taxes your whole life. I guess you'd get a great pension that might outweigh everything like that. But I don't know. I think you're really letting the state rule your life a lot more that way.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great point. In one sense, like if everything the state touches is lava, then it actually takes away more of your freedom thinking that way as a libertarian, because now you can't, do all like if you want to like be a teacher, like there are some private schools, but in some states, like the private schools are pretty much public schools. They're like the parents pay for them, and so there's a little bit more selection and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the state has so much control over what the curriculum is and everything. And in some states, there's just a small number of schools that are really exempt from like all the state regulations and stuff that like you might not be able to be a teacher, but like if that's what you really want, like you love kids, you want to teach, like why should you not do that? And also, I mean, like if you have a libertarian teacher and like somebody who's not like rah war in the classroom, that's not a bad thing either. I'm not saying that like you have to like teach Tom Woods in the history class or whatever. Like I know you gotta go by the textbook, but like you don't have to like give that same like pro-war vibe that so many of us got in grade school.
Well, and you could think of so many worse things that you could do as an agent of the state than be a teacher or a firefighter
Right.
or
Right.
something.
Now, if you want to be a soldier or a cop, that's where I would draw the line and be like, no. Like you could put out fires, but you can't shoot people.
Yeah. Well, maybe if you were a soldier like National Guard who actually didn't participate in law enforcement at all.
Well, I mean, so I would go for that if we could get like the defend the guard pass. I'll have Mike Maher. I'll have the show out by the time this airs. I just had Mike Mahary on my show to talk about that and how important that legislation is. Because look, if you want to, join the National Guard because your state needs help fighting forest fires or when hurricanes come or something like that, you want to, be trained and ready, or in your wildest delusion that the Chinese ever land on the shores of California or something like that. Like that's what you think. That's not what the National Guard is. Now they're going to get deployed to Iraq.
Right.
So
And wasn't it it was infamous that during Hurricane Katrina the Louisiana National Guard was deployed to Iraq or
yeah,
Afghanistan?
well, I think during even more recently during these current wildfires, I think it was Washington State, it might have been Oregon. They had, I believe, 6 Chinook helicopters that could, carry whatever fire, thing they water or whatever and dump it on the flames. Those were in Afghanistan. So
Yeah. And we're stretched so thin, it just seems like, I don't know. So how would you, I mean, I think we both agree that um, America is an empire, right?
world empire.
A world empire. And do you think that American world empire power is definitely being spread thin and kind of on the wane?
I would think so, but now everybody feels that it's been reinvigorated by Obama becoming, president, and that he's going to, because I do think in a sense that Trump did spread it a little bit more thin, in the sense that, he picked a more aggressive policy with Russia despite all the Putin stuff, and he ramped up Obama's pivot to Asia and really turned up the heat on China. And then also extended Venezuela, re-up tensions with Iran. And so there's a lot of places where Trump had extended the empire. I also feel like he extended it more in the financial sense. So the U.S. really, the dollar is the world reserve currency, which gives the U.S. a lot of advantages. It also means that our sanctions mean a lot more. Like if Russia or China sanctions Boeing, it may hurt their stock a little bit or something like that. But let's say the U.S. sanctioned like Airbus, that would kill it. You know what I mean? Like if Airbus can't do business in dollars, Airbus can't do business. And so we've slapped sanctions on a lot of different countries, and this has created situations where countries have looked to trade in other commodities with each other. I think Sri Lanka was looking to like trade tea with Iran for oil. Russia's facilitated stuff. Turkey has traded in gold, I believe, with Venezuela and Iran, and so. Uh, um, I think in some sense that the Trump administration has used the sanction hammer so heavily, and to defend Trump a little bit here, in the cases that he's actually looked to repeal sanctions, Congress has flipped out and prevented him from doing that. Even the sanctions should have never been there in the first place. But that I imagine it has to have hurt the U.S. a little bit in our ability to, like, if you sanction half the world's economy, that half of the world economy will just figure out another way to trade. It's not like they're going to sit there with their finger in their nose and go, well, the Americans say that we can't do business in dollars. So I have this, jet engine I built in Beijing, and you have some steel in Moscow. And damn it, we just can't figure out how the hell I could get this engine there. You could get that steel here. No dollars, no business. But that's obviously not what's going to happen. And I guess that trend would continue. As far as the U.S. military hegemony, I don't know. Like, in a sense, I feel like it would have to be the financial collapse first, just because no other country would waste as much money projecting power as the U.S. does. Like China is maybe looking to defend the South China Sea, the East China Sea. Maybe they're looking to exert more influence and rein in some of Taiwan's independence or Hong Kong's independence. I'm not saying that China doesn't have interests that aren't outside the immediate borders of mainland China and isn't developing military capabilities to defend those interests. But at the same time, they're not looking at conquering the Philippines, right? That's not what Russia yeah, they're going to defend their territorial interest, their military bases, whether that's in Crimea or Syria, but Russia is not going to invade Eastern Europe. I mean, hell, the NATO's expanded all the way to Russia's border, and Russia hasn't done anything about it. The U.S. carries out military missions on both Russia and China's border, in the same week. And so the U.S. has the, military equipment, I suppose, and everything that I don't think that anybody would actually challenge the U.S. on that front. I would guess it would happen more financially first, and then the U.S. and military equipment will either, start to get old and decay, or more and more of it will just have to come home financially.
In your last episode, I believe it was your last one or one of the more recent ones, you were talking. You had a guest on to talk about China specifically and kind of flash ups in the South China Sea and that kind of area. If there were any potential for war between the United States and another country, do you think it's more likely in the Middle East or against China in the South China Sea area? Or do you have a thought on that?
I mean, it's really hard to say because, had Trump got elected, my guess would have been Iran. We just had a report this week from, I believe, the New York Times, that said that Trump had talked to Pence, his vice president, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, Christopher Miller, the new acting Secretary of Defense, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff head, Mark Milley, about possibly carrying out a strike against the Iran, the nuclear facility, Natanz, where they have some nuclear centrifuges and stuff like that. It's a civilian nuclear program. You know, they're making energy. They're not making bombs, but you know, the Trump administration, you know, Trump has won war with Iran from day one and has tried to push and push and push. I guess I should say Trump has won war with Iran. He's won a very aggressive policy. I think several members of his administration actually do want war, including, you know, former member Pompeo, Bolton, and current Pompeo would be my two guesses as Trump administration officials who have really pushed the war with Iran issue. Now you have Biden coming in, who was a part of the Obama administration that negotiated the nuclear deal with Iran, that took war with Iran off the table. Is a really important deal in that sense, right? And so that was Obama's policy. Biden kind of didn't run for president, but he was known as Obama's vice president. So that's what got him elected. So you assume that he would stick with Obama's foreign policy on that issue. But the U.S. has gotten out of the deal under the Trump administration, and has placed sanctions on Iran and has increased sanctions during the pandemic on Iran, which I mean, however it's impacting the U.S., it's apparently making the situation on Iran worse, the pandemic. And so, you know, people are having a harder, I hear people are having a hard time getting insulin and cancer medications in Iran because of the U.S. sanctions and stuff like that. And so, you know, I hear a lot of people proposing that the Biden could do something like say, okay, you know, we're going to lift the sanctions, which I don't even know if he could lift all the sanctions right away. Like some of them may be congressional mandates and stuff like that. And I doubt he would lift all of them right away. But let's say he lifts some of the sanctions and say, okay, Iran, now you have to get back in the deal. The Iranians could say, well, you know, it's been a real, you know, detriment to our economy. First, you know, we prepared for all this business from the West, and then you cut it off with your sanctions. And so that's been a real problem. And, you know, how do we know that you're going to stay in the deal once we, you know, redo our, you know, nuclear? One of the big issues is that Iran has like 2,000 kilograms, I believe, of nuclear enriched nuclear fuel that's like enriched to 5%, nowhere necessary near the necessary number needed for like a nuclear bomb, which is 95%. And also before the 2015 deal kicked in, Iran had, I believe, like 10 or times more of the nuclear fuel than they have now. But anyways, like, you know, if Iran ships all that out, then what's to say that the Biden administration just won't go back and put on more sanctions? Or, you know, I mean, it's not like anybody thinks Biden's going to be president for more than 4 years, if not probably less.
Right.
You know, like I'm just not sure like that Iran is going to be like, okay, yeah, we remember you, Mr. Biden. Like, sure, we'll hop right back into it and full and it may even be more than that because there's like important Democrats like Bob Menendez, who's on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. He could even be leading it, and he says that Iran just getting back in the deal isn't good enough. They had to like agree to missile caps and stuff like that too. And so I'm not sure what the U.S. planning is. They, you know, get in a deal, then they back out of it, impose sanctions even when Iran wasn't breaking it, and then they get back into it and say, oh, for the Iranians to get back into it, they now have to make more concessions. I mean, you know, even by Trump negotiation like tactics, that's pretty bold. So I don't think Iran's gonna. So and if that happens, now you're in a position where Biden's a Democrat, and so like if Trump bats down on war, maybe they'll call him Putin's puppet. But other than that, it's not like they're gonna be like, oh, Trump doesn't attack Iran because Trump's weak. Like that's not like a criticism that people make it down Trump that is weak. Now, feeble-minded, you know, could barely read a teleprompter, Joe Biden, who, I mean, like, guessing that we're a couple weeks from people speculating that the guy is walking around in an adult diaper and stuff like that. Like, you have somebody who looks like an awfully feeble old man. And if everybody goes, oh, he's weak, he's afraid to attack Iran, he's afraid the Ayatollah over and over again, I'm afraid of what he would, what kind of response that would elicit. And so, like, whenever I try to figure out what's going to happen under a president, it's hard because, yeah, Trump took a more like aggressive stand on like immigration and stuff like that. But if you look at first term numbers, I saw this from MSNBC. Obama deported a hell of a lot more Mexicans during his first term than Trump did. And I'm not saying that, in some other ways, Trump's immigration policy wasn't like, the family separation stuff is gross and everything like that. But there's a lot that goes into it other than just what the president's position is how everybody reacts to him. So despite everybody, going on and on about how Trump's Putin's puppet, he's had the most aggressive Russia policy of any president maybe ever. You certainly had to go back to, peak Cold War days to find, he destroyed 2 key arms control agreements, the INF Treaty and the Open Skies Treaty. He's not going to renew New START. And so, hopefully Biden could save it in his first couple of days in office. But if not, we could lose that one as well. And, his sanctions have been very aggressive against Russia. He hasn't pulled troops out of Syria. He, maintains that Russia has to get back Crimea and all this other stuff. Continues with the multi-trillion-dollar package to upgrade America's nuclear weapons. Like, all these are very provocative against Russia. And everybody pretends like Donald Trump is Putin's puppet. And so, despite what the president says and what may seem like his policy intentions are, the opposite could happen just because of the crazy way U.S. politics play out.
And we were talking earlier about how neither of us predicted that the lockdowns would last this long. I don't think anyone could have. I guess hindsight being 2020.
Pete Quinones, I'll give him credit. He called it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I stand corrected. But yeah, I mean, who knows what could happen? It's just one thing I did think of though, and this was during the final presidential debate, is how tough Biden tried to be on North Korea.
Oh yeah, that was disturbing.
I thought of you immediately. Because whenever foreign policy comes up, I think of you right away. But
I'm marketing myself well, Pat.
Yeah. But what do you think a Biden presidency would look like towards North Korea?
So I think this one actually would be like a return to the Obama policy, which is concerning, but at the same time, I'm not sure if I'm concerned. Talk to me a month into Biden's presidency, and I'll tell you the exact. Maybe maybe he's going really aggressively. In that debate, he goes, "Kim Jong-un's a thug. Like, yeah. Like it sounds like something Donald Trump would say. First of all, right? Like if you imagine Donald Trump would have said that about another world leader, especially a brown world leader, people would have been like, what a racist, and oh my God. But Joe Biden gets away with it. And so the Obama policy towards North Korea was this strategic patience, where they said North Korea had to give up their nuclear weapons, and then the U.S. would talk to them about reducing sanctions. Well, like nobody negotiates that way. It would be like the car dealership saying, before you even come on the property and look at a car, you put down $10,000, and they'll go, if you buy a car, they'll go to one of the cars that you buy. But if you don't buy a car, we keep that $10,000.
Right.
Like North Korea is not going to agree to that. It's a stupid idea. And that's Joe Biden's stated policy. And so best case scenario, things just go on the way they are for 4 years. But the thing is that North Korea doesn't just want to suffer under U.S. sanctions endlessly. They're going to, test weapons and, make news headlines and stuff like that. They invested in their nuclear program for a reason. And now they're going, I think they'll try to leverage it, maybe carry out a nuclear test or an ICBM test or something like that. Now, there were times during the Trump administration and during the Obama administration where it seemed like the U.S. policy was, if the U.S. were to, or if North Korea were to develop a missile and a nuclear weapon that could, be launched from North Korea and hit the U.S., that we would, carry out some military strike in that case. And I don't know, maybe North Korea is like really on the cusp of that. I have some questions about if they've actually been able to miniaturize their nuclear warheads, if their ICBMs actually could, make it up and down with a nuclear warhead attached and hit a target and, not disintegrate on reentry and all that. There's a lot of questions. But at the same time, I think that somebody could make the case to Biden that North Korea has this ability. So it depends on who he puts in what positions. As far as I could tell, I don't, as hawkish as like Susan Rice, his potential Secretary of State, and Michelle Flournoy, his potential Secretary of Defense are, I don't know if they like particularly are going to like go out of their way to start a war with North Korea. So my guess is that ends up on the back burner of the Biden administration. North Koreans continue to suffer and die under U.S. sanctions and their repressive regime. The U.S. continues to stifle South Korea's ability to make peace with their, border neighbors and, the Korean people, of the peninsula. They're really one ethnic group, one religion, or not religion, one race, one language. I guess there's a difference between North and South Korean, but like, is like Spanish to Spanish, right? So yeah, all that the Korean people should be left. Like the U.S. shouldn't interfere and say, "Oh no, our sanctions make it so that you can't have this diplomat mission to North Korea, or you can't, build a factory in North Korea, or you can't do this with North Korea, some way to like increase cooperation." Which even around the Olympics, when the Koreas were going to like walk out together and do different things, people were speculating that could like somehow violate U.S. sanctions, and so sanctions get in the way of a lot. And my guess is that continues. One of the unfortunate things about all of it is that I thought there was a unique opportunity in the Trump administration. Not only did you have Donald Trump, but I believe it was in 2016, the leader of South Korea got wrapped up in corruption scandal. And actually, I don't know if she ended up going to jail, but was sentenced to some jail time. And so that opened the door. So like, imagine if a president went to jail, right? A sitting president not only gets impeached in office, but gets sent to jail. You would assume that the incoming party is going to have a hell of a mandate. You know what I mean? Like just the reaction to it, you're going to probably have an overwhelming, mandate from the people. And Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, like had a lot of momentum coming in, and the Olympics happened, and Donald Trump, wasn't, ideological like rigid nut job on the issue like so many other U.S. foreign policy thinkers have been in the past, and was willing to go and talk with Kim Jong-un and wasn't worried about this farcical idea that, oh, by talking to a foreign leader you bestow legitimacy on them, and oh god, Donald Trump's magic legitimacy, even though this guy is apparently Orange Hitler, gives Kim Jong-un all the power in the world to do I don't know what. I talked about this on my show. People kept saying, well, it was a risk that Donald Trump was going to go talk to Kim Jong-un. I'm like, what do you think he's going to do? Give him the property rights to Hawaii? Like, what, he was going to be like, oh, yeah, look, actually, Kim Jong-un, you're now the supreme leader of all Korea. Screw South Korea. That doesn't exist anymore. He had nothing to give away. He has nothing to trade. The U.S. has an aggressive policy against North Korea. We sell our warships around them. We sanction them. What we have to do is we trade that away in order to get some kind of military concessions from North Korea or something like that. I don't know exactly what the deal would be at this point. I don't think there's any way they would give up their nukes until several years down the line where sanctions have been listed and stuff like that. But
yeah, I remember when Donald Trump shook hands with Kim Jong-un, and that was, it seems like that, it's symbolic, but it's so unprecedented, it seems like, in the recent history. And I'm sure that goes so much further than sanctions, of course, towards some kind of a mutually beneficial goal. Is it the idea with U.S. sanctions? Is it that you're gonna piss off the people of North Korea so they will rise up and overthrow the regime. Is that a thought at all, or is it just to punish the regime?
Oh, I mean, it's a little bit of both. I suppose, like, depending on who you're asking and how, they feel that day, they might give you one answer or the other. I've heard both. I guess the whole get the people, riled up to overthrow the government thing kind of lost its taste when Madeleine Albright said the price is worth it, talking about 500,000 Iraqi kids. People talk about how awful Trump has been, and I agree. He's been an awful president, has committed war crimes. And if people want to like prosecute him for his war crimes, like you could bury that guy where I don't care, right? But if you just want to talk about cruelty inflicted for the sake of cruelty, you have on record on 60 Minutes, then Ambassador to the UN, Madeleine Albright, saying that the intentional U.S. policy in Iraq is to starve children to death until the people rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein, and that we push that policy to what they believe was 500,000 children dying, and not saying that, oh my God, we made a terrible mistake. It's not worth it. This isn't working. But they thought that that price was worth it. Like that's crazy horrific.
And I remember I thought maybe I had this conversation with you about it's disputed the actual number of children that
It
died in
is.
Iraq, but it doesn't matter because they believed it was 500,000.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
For the sake of this argument, like if we want to have a more academic argument about, let's say, how many millions of people, how many millions of Iraqis has the U.S. killed since 1990? Maybe we only have to count that as 300,000 or 350,000. But for the purpose of like the morality of the issue and what the U.S. thought they were doing,
yeah.
hey, it's 500,000.
Well, and wasn't it the funny? Well, it's not funny, but the funny thing about it is that was it Clinton who had encouraged, was it the Kurds to rise up against Saddam and then basically left them hanging and allowed them to
That
be
was no, that was H.W. Bush.
that was,
That was after the first Iraq War.
right?
But to cycle back to Madeleine Albright here,
Yeah,
at least when Susan Rice went out after the whole Benghazi Libya thing and botched it, she didn't end up. She didn't get a promotion where the Senate had to confirm her. She ended up as a national security advisor, which is an appointment. Madeleine Albright then got promoted to Secretary of State. And, to this day, she's known for being like a heroic female secretary. This is what scares the hell out of me about Michelle Flournoy. One of the things that makes me absolutely sick when I watch Parks and Rec is that, this lady is like, well, she like said that starving to death 500,000 children was worth it, and
right,
she's not the word like a monster. I
right.
I just don't understand, what I mean? Or at the very least, like it's not like a stain and like she's like kind of somebody that we're uncomfortable with. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised because George Bush like tortured random Muslims because they were Muslim and Arab and stuff like that. And like he's better than Trump, right?
Yeah,
That's what everybody thinks.
right. Well, and it was funny to see how afterwards George Bush, with Michelle Obama kissing him on the cheek, how the whole aura in his mythos turned around. I mean, being someone, I mean, I'm 27 years old, I think, right? Um, but I remember how much people hated George W. Bush, and now he's turned into this, cute old like kind of grandpa-ish figure by those same people.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
just ridiculous.
I mean, there was at least a feeling like I remember I was like around like a little bit more of a conservative like media vibe at the time, but there was like a concern that like he could possibly be prosecuted after he left office for like the horrific things that he did. The Abu Ghraib in Iraq where they were like just sexually abusing, like just any Iraqi male ended up in that prison. You know, that's where, or at least one of the places that, the future leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, was tortured and humiliated by the Americans. You think that has anything to do with the reason the guy may be willing to, burn people alive, is because a bunch of random people from a different country could come to their country, point guns in their faces, and make 20 grown men lay in a naked pile on the floor because they are dogs to them? Like, I'm not trying to like make anybody feel sympathetic to Bad Daddy or anything, but you have to imagine that like the what he saw and was potentially subject to in American torture prisons that George Bush at least was like passively approving of, uh is part of the reason why he was such an evil character in his life later after that, and why so many people are willing to follow him. That's like undisputed, that George Bush's Iraq war ignited a jihadist movement in Iraq that Al Qaeda turned into Al Nusra and ISIS, and now is just a bunch of I think they call themselves Tahrir al-Sham or something like that, and hang out in northern Syria and suicide bomb every once in a while. But yeah, and yeah, this guy's the friendly grandpa, right? And,
Right.
my favorite thing about this, right, is when people say Trump is uniquely evil, and I say, well, George Bush tortured Muslims to death, and Bill Clinton starved 500,000 Iraqi children to death. That's somehow defending Donald Trump, like reminding people that like we committed massive war crimes in the past few years is somehow a defense of the fact that I don't think Donald Trump is the worst person that has ever inhabited the planet. So
And that's just the ones that we know about. I mean, it's possible that, I mean, I'm sure we don't know everything that occurred.
right,
Yeah.
no, we know we don't know because the current CIA director that got approval from the Senate, who served in the CIA during Obama's administration, who oversaw torture and then destroyed the tapes of the torture to make sure she couldn't get busted for it. They tortured somebody to death. It may not have been exactly why she was there, but she was, at the most 1 degree, away from people being tortured to death. And she got away with it. She did it during the Bush years. She got away with it during the Obama years. And then she got promoted during the Trump years. And it's not like Trump's greatest offense ever was making a torturess the director of the CIA. Him firing Jeff Sessions, the, crazy drug warrior who's probably one of the, few people who's like a real racist, like not in the, like, will occasionally dog whistle, but I'm guessing that, this guy probably actually wants to keep black people down. That guy, him getting fired is a real offense, but putting Gina Haspel in that position wasn't.
And the last time you were on the show was we talked about Gina Haspel being appointed. That's at libertyweekly.net/73. So what do you look like on time? Do you have time for one more topic?
Yeah, I could probably do one more. I think my dog's getting ready to go for a walk. So if
Okay.
he comes in and starts howling,
All right. Then we'll know that the dog's got to go home.
yeah,
That's a figure of speech, right?
I don't
Oh,
know.
really ham-handed. I'm sorry. So my other question is, I've seen videos on Twitter of situation getting very desperate, it looks like, in Africa under COVID lockdowns. And I've heard other people talk about this. But my thought was, me being kind of an ignorant person a little bit on these topics, along with most people, but if I see videos of hundreds of thousands or thousands of people flocking to a food distribution center, that could have happened at any point in Africa in the last 10 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's tough because even like I pay a lot of attention to foreign policy, and like if I'm watching a video of something happening, like a attack or something like that, like I could probably tell if it's like in Afghanistan versus somewhere in like the Arabian Peninsula, right? Like the people look a little bit different, looks a little bit different, but you have to watch a lot of video to start to be able to tell. You know, one of the things about the human brain is it tries to, I think, do things like as efficiently as possible, right? And so, if you know things in Africa, you know, you don't see it very often. Your brain just generalizes it to Africa, right? You have to start to be able to like categorize it more and more. And so, I just don't have that when it comes to Africa. You're right that like it could, unless it was from like a source I particularly trusted. I'm not sure I would necessarily buy that, like you're saying, like if it's just some random Twitter account saying like, "Oh, there's food lines here, how terrible," you know, that's yeah, be skeptical. That's a good call. You know, I will say that I'm not sure how much Africa has locked down from the virus. You know, initially, my thoughts on the virus were that I was most concerned with countries like Yemen or the people of the occupied territories in Palestine, just because the medical systems there are so terrible, and it's, you know, because of the occupation or the war and stuff like that. But I think part of it is that this, you know, really does affect people with like like severe respiratory issues, or you know, are pretty susceptible from dying to something like pneumonia. And unfortunately, a lot of those people didn't live to the point where you could get taken out by pneumonia. You know what I mean? And so I think in some of these countries, COVID hasn't been as bad because the life expectancy isn't as long, and people who are susceptible of COVID have already perished of something else. And
Yeah.
so I'm not, I know there's been like protests going on in Nigeria, which concerns me with the incoming Biden presidency. We know that he has a lot of humanitarian interventionists lined up in his administration. These are people who are going to, in every country, they're going to see a potential Rwanda. They're going to think that they're going to be the heroes that save and prevent another genocide. And you know, so Pat, like let's say, you know, if you have one ethnic group in a country and you convince yourself that they're going to kill every member of the other ethnic group, I mean, you have a lot of moral room to kill a lot of people and pretend like you did the right thing. And it happened in Libya. They tried to do it in Syria under Obama. You know, his drone program everywhere was part of this, where, you know, we're just going to kill the right people and it's going to make things better. And it always made things worse. And in Africa's most populous country, it terrifies me to think of what they would try to exploit if there's like real unrest and protests going on there. So, if you're a Nigerian and listen to this show, get your stuff figured out before January 20th. I think Trump will be far too distracted with anything else to get involved in your country. And then you know, if you got all sorted out, the Obama hots can't, or the hots from the Obama administration can't come in and destroy everything. But I do worry about getting more involved in Africa under the incoming administration here. And yeah, and look, and if in these countries, I've talked about this a lot on the show with the COVID lockdowns. You know, these are the countries where if people lose a little bit of wealth, they're going from like being poor to being like on the cusp of life, right? Like there are people in this world that just can't get the resources they need to survive. You know, it's like I don't know what the hell, like 1800 America, right? Like people are going west and like people starved to death. Like kids died of, you know, starvation or infection and preventable things. Well, according to the UN now, there's an extra 100,000 children every month dying of things since the lockdown starting and everything like that. And so, you know, if these countries are either being locked down or, you know, the long-term supply chains effect of the COVID lockdown. So, you know, all those potatoes they dump in Idaho, I don't know if any of them would have ended up in Africa, but maybe those calories go to somebody else. And so rather than eating something else, you know, that goes to somebody else. And then eventually, you know, something is now available either to go as aid to Africa or to be available as a product in Africa because there's more wealth and prosperity in the US and stuff. Like, you know, this is also all the medical supplies that we've like gobbled up to fight this COVID threat. This is something that I talked about with Pete on my show. I really like the episode. I think people should go listen to it. But you know, when this whole COVID thing started, Chris Cuomo, the governor of New York, you know, demanded that he had the largest hospital in the world, the ship, I think it's the USS Mercy or the USS Comfort, come to New York Harbor, didn't treat anybody. What else could that ship have been doing? All the medical supplies that he brought in, these are things that could go to other places that weren't able to go there, all these medical resources. And so if you blew the COVID threat way out of proportion, it's not like, oh, you're the only one that cares about life. There are people in this world who are going to suffer from that, and it may not be your neighbor. And so I do worry about conditions like continuing to deteriorate in the poor countries. If the COVID stuff isn't like, I mean, even if the COVID stuff, you know, gets relieved, I'm sure like the supply chain issues won't be worked out right away or anything like that. But at least I guess if it's relieved, then, you know, wealth and money is freed up to go as aid to other places, and hopefully people don't starve to death too much.
Yeah, that's kind of like the seen and the unseen. I mean, basically what it is. But so I don't know. Let's hope that your predictions or your fears about Nigeria don't come to pass. But I really think Kamala Harris really strikes me as a Hillary Clinton type. I mean, she reminds me so much of her. It's kind of scary.
But I don't see it. I don't see it too much. I don't. So Hillary Clinton fashions herself as a foreign policy expert. I don't think Kamala Harris does. There might be things that she sees herself as an expert as, but I think on foreign policy, she would like defer to others. Whereas where Hillary Clinton would, I would say like Susan Rice or Michelle Flournoy would be a little bit more Hillary Clinton, where they think they could point the spots around the world where they're going to kill the right people to help people. I'm not sure that Kamala Harris feels that she has the ability to do that, but I do think she'll surround herself with people who, you know what I mean? Like she believes in that. She just doesn't do it herself. Or
I feel like Kamala has the same aura, I guess is what I'm saying, like for a very bad term, but like the personality reminds me of it in that way. Like
the laugh does, like the laughing at inappropriate questions, like Hillary Clinton's cackle about Gaddafi, or the fact that Kamala Harris called Joe Biden a racist during the debate, right? And look, I think there's different things in Joe Biden's past. You definitely point out that we're racist, and if that amounts to him being a racist, I don't know. But she calls him racist on the debate stage, and then somebody asked her about it, and she laughs and says it was a debate. And it's like, so one of two things are going on here. One, you either just lob the charge of racist against the potential next president of the United States for no reason, which kind of seems concerning that you would do that to not just somebody like on a personal level, but then you would like also devalue the term of racism, right? Like if you're calling somebody a racist who's not a racist, then it makes racist less meaningful. Or you are now like lying and covering for a racist so you could become his vice president, which is also really creepy.
Yeah.
Like she could have said, I had a lot of meaningful conversations with Joe. I feel differently about him now than I did before. And hell, that might have even made him more likable, for this lady to come up there and say like, no, I felt like I looked into his soul and I actually trust him. I know him that well before, or something like that. Or to say that, I took the position because I think it's going to give me the best potential to influence the administration. And even if I don't see eye to eye on Joe with everything, blah, blah, blah. There were ways to like give an actual answer to that question, but her answer was so strange and so creepy that it did I do see the Hillary Clinton vibes.
Or to do the thing where we did it, Joe. We won that whole
on the side of the road.
Yeah.
That was so ridiculous. I wonder if they made her change out of her pantsuit into that like pajama-ish clothes to make the call. I guarantee you they did.
Yeah. No, I'm sure they did. And with I didn't think her hair was sweaty or tousled or anything like that, but well, anyways, man, I've really appreciated having you on. There was far too long of a gap between the last episode. I mean, think back to how long ago Gina Haspel was appointed.
And it seems even longer. You know, it was only 11 months ago now that Trump assassinated Qasem Soleimani.
Yeah.
And you know, we're exchanging those. Iran was firing missiles at Iraqi bases, and here we are.
That's insane.
It
Yeah.
is.
Well, where can everybody find your work, man?
Libertarianinstitute.org. If you go to the homepage there, my name's on the top banner, so you could click on my name, and then they'll give you two columns. The right one is the show, and the left one is the news roundup. Or go to antiwar.com. The news section is great. That's Jason Ditz and Dave DeCamp, and I work on the viewpoint section, the spotlight, stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, I love your work, man. Keep it up. It's excellent. Fighting the good fight.
Thanks, Pat.